I never thought I'd be the kind of person to rent out my house to strangers, let alone run an Airbnb. But life has a way of pushing you into things you didn't expect. It started 4 years ago, after my dad passed away. He left me his old house on the edge of Somerville, a quiet, slightly run-down town in upstate New York. I was living 2 hours south in Fairpoint with my wife, Lena, and juggling a full-time job as a security system installer. The house was too big for us, and too full of memories for me to live in it. I didn't want to sell it, though. It still felt like it was my dad's house, you know? Selling it felt like closing a chapter I wasn't ready to let go of. At first, I thought about renting it out long-term, but then a friend of mine, Jay, mentioned how much money his cousin was making with Airbnb. People want places like that, he told me over beers one night. A quiet old house in the middle of nowhere. City people eat that shit up for weekend getaways. He wasn't wrong. Lena and I gave it a shot, setting up a listing with a few photos of the place. The old brick chimney, creaky wraparound porch, a backyard big enough to land a small plane. It had charm if you looked at it the right way. Within a week, we had our first booking, then another, and another. The money was better than we expected. By the second year, it was bringing in enough to pay off our car loan and cover a vacation or two. Of course, it wasn't all easy. Managing bookings, scheduling cleanings, and answering messages at all hours took its toll. There were weird guests now and then. Someone who complained about the trees being too loud when the wind picked up at night, or the college kids who left behind enough beer cans to fill a dumpster. But nothing truly bad ever happened, until last summer. It was a Friday night in late July. I remember because I had just finished a brutal 12-hour shift installing security cameras at a commercial property in Hudson. I was dead on my feet when I got home, ready to collapse into bed. That's when my phone buzzed. New message. Airbnb guest Caleb M. Hey, we just got here. House looks great. Thanks again for letting us stay. I texted back a quick, no problem, enjoy your stay, and put my phone down. Typical check-in. I barely thought about it. Caleb had booked a one-night stay for himself and his girlfriend according to the profile. I should mention most of the time I never actually met the guests. The house had a digital lock. I sent the code by text an hour before check-in. They'd come and go and I'd get a message when they left. Rinse and repeat. That night, around 9:20, just as I was brushing my teeth, my phone buzzed again. Caleb. Hey man, quick question. The water's not working? I frowned. The house wasn't fancy, but I kept it in good shape. I hadn't had a single issue with the plumbing since we started renting it out. I called him. Hey Caleb. What's going on? His voice was calm, polite. Yeah, we just tried to use the bathroom and there's no water at all. No pressure in the sinks or shower. That's weird. Was it working earlier when you got there? Didn't try it until now, he replied. We unpacked and went out to get food, just got back. Okay, I sighed, running a hand over my face. Listen, I live about 20 minutes away, but I can swing by and check the main valve. Maybe something's up with the well pump or the pressure switch. Caleb sounded genuinely apologetic. Sorry about this, man. Appreciate it. No problem. Be there soon. I told Lena where I was going. She wasn't thrilled. Do it in the morning, she said from under the covers. I shook my head. If it's a simple fix, I'll feel better handling it now. Don't want them leaving a bad review. That house brought in too much money for me to risk it. The drive out to Somerville was quiet. No traffic at that hour. The roads were lined with tall trees and broken-down barns. The old house sat at the end of Birch Hollow Lane, a dead-end street with only two other houses, both dark. As I pulled into the gravel driveway, I noticed two cars parked there, a beat-up Navy Honda Civic and a black Ford Explorer. I distinctly remembered the reservation note. My girlfriend and I will be driving up from Albany. Why would they need two cars? Maybe one of their friends came along, I thought. Technically against the house rules, but I'd let it slide if it wasn't a party. I grabbed my flashlight and headed to the front door. I didn't bother knocking, just punched in the code. The lock clicked. I stepped inside. Hello? I called out. No answer. The house was dim. A couple lights were on, one in the living room, one in the upstairs hallway. I expected to hear voices, TV, music, something. It was dead silent. Maybe they went out again. I made my way to the basement door, flicked on the light, and went down. The air smelled musty. The main water valve was along the far wall, beside the ancient furnace my dad never got around to replacing. I checked the valve. It was shut off. Completely. What the hell? I turned it counterclockwise, hearing the pipes groan as water rushed back through them. I stood there for a second, trying to make sense of it. Why would anyone turn off the water? It wasn't something you could do by accident. That's when I heard footsteps from upstairs. Slow. Heavy. More than one set. I killed the basement light, heart pounding. The door at the top of the stairs creaked open. I stayed where I was, clutching my flashlight like a weapon. Then a voice. "Is it working now?" It wasn't Caleb's voice. It was deeper. Older. 3 men appeared at the top of the stairs. One by one they descended. Middle-aged, rough-looking. Beards, heavy jackets, one with a cap pulled low over his eyes. Not Caleb. Not even close. I forced my voice steady. "Yeah, should be fine now. Valve must have gotten stuck." They didn't say anything, just stared. I tried to ease toward the stairs, keeping my expression neutral. "Well, I'll get out of your hair. Call me if anything else happens." As I passed them, I saw it, tucked into the waistband of the guy in the cap. A gun, not a little concealed pistol, a full-size revolver. I felt my stomach drop. They let me walk up those stairs. I don't know why. I didn't run, didn't show panic, just moved. Got to the front door, stepped outside, walked to my truck, got in, locked the doors, drove away. Didn't stop till I hit the gas station 10 miles down the road. I called Lena, my hands shaking. "Call the cops," she said immediately. I did. By the time officers got there, the house was empty. No cars, no men. The code on the lock had been changed from the inside. Next day, we found out the credit card used for the reservation was stolen. The whole Airbnb profile, fake, burner phone. The 2 cars were both reported stolen that same night. They'd taken stuff too. A couple antique clocks, my dad's old hunting rifle I kept locked up. They cracked the cabinet. Some vintage vinyl records Lena left behind when we cleared out the house. But the worst part was what the sheriff found in the basement. A coil of rope, a roll of duct tape, and a pair of heavy-duty zip ties. Their plan wasn't to rob the house. It was to wait for me. I don't know why they let me leave. Maybe because I stayed calm. Maybe because something changed their minds. Maybe because they weren't done setting up. But I never went back. Not alone. Not after dark. A week later, we shut down the listing. Some extra money's never worth dying over. I've always preferred traveling alone. Maybe it comes from growing up in a chaotic household. 3 siblings, a single mom working 2 jobs, and a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in Boise, Idaho. The only time I ever really felt peace was when I could slip away with a book or my headphones and shut out the world. So when I got older and finally had a decent paying job at a small marketing firm, I started taking solo trips whenever I could scrape together the cash and vacation days. This story happened last September. I'd been planning a week-long trip down the Oregon coast, something I'd wanted to do for years. The plan was to start in Astoria, make my way through the little beach towns, and end up in Brookings. I found a beautiful Airbnb right by the water for the main part of my trip, a cozy studio cabin with a fire pit and a view of the Pacific. But it wasn't available the first night I arrived, so I booked a stopover about an hour inland in a town called Harper's Glen. I'd never heard of it before, but it was cheap, had good reviews, and was listed as a private 2-bedroom home, self-check-in, secluded and peaceful. Sounded perfect for a night. I got there around 7:30 p.m. after a long drive. Harper's Glen was one of those blink-and-you'll-miss-it towns. A single gas station, a diner, and a few scattered neighborhoods. The sun was just starting to set, and the house sat at the end of a gravel road surrounded by tall pine trees. It looked exactly like the photos. A plain beige single-story home with a little porch and a chipped white rocking chair. The code for the lockbox worked fine. Inside it was clean but had that slightly musty, closed-up smell, like nobody had stayed there in a while. The living room had one of those old floral-patterned couches, a boxy TV, and a scratched-up coffee table. I did what I always do, walked through the whole house, checked the closets, under the beds, the bathrooms. It's probably overkill, but being a woman traveling alone, you learn to be cautious. Both bedrooms were empty and neat. One had a twin bed and a little bookshelf with old paperbacks, the other a queen-size bed with a faded patchwork quilt. I picked the bigger room, brought my bag in, and changed into sweats. It felt quiet. A little too quiet, if I'm honest. No nearby houses, no traffic noise, just crickets and the occasional rustle of branches. By 8:30, I was half dozing on the couch, scrolling through my phone. I'd been planning to order food, but the only places that delivered closed at 8. Typical small-town stuff. I figured I'd just eat the granola bar in my bag and crash early. That's when the doorbell rang. It wasn't loud, more like a quick, sharp ding-dong, but it made me jump hard enough to drop my phone. I sat up, heart pounding. Who the hell rings a doorbell at 8:30 in the middle of nowhere? I knew for a fact I hadn't passed another car or person on my way in. I waited, listening. Then I heard it. Voices. 2 men talking in low whispers right outside the front door. The walls were thin enough that I could catch bits and pieces. "Are you sure she's in there? What if..." My stomach nodded. I'm not easily scared, but this? Alone in a strange town, 2 men whispering outside the door? Terrifying. I stood up and quietly grabbed my phone, backing away from the living room toward the hallway where I could see the door but not be seen from the window beside it. There was no chain lock, no deadbolt, just a simple knob lock. A man's voice called out, startlingly clear. "Hey, we're here for the Airbnb. Can you open the door?" His tone was casual, like this was the most normal thing in the world. But something about it felt off, like he was forcing it to sound friendly. I cleared my throat, trying to keep my voice steady. "I think you've got the wrong place. I booked this house for tonight." There was a pause. No, I have it booked. I got the message from the owner and everything," he insisted. I felt my hand tremble around my phone. My first instinct was to believe him. Mistakes happen, double bookings, wrong addresses. But then I remembered I'd spoken with the host just that morning to confirm my stay. She even messaged me when I checked in, thanking me for coming. I took a shaky breath. "You should call the owner then. I talked to her earlier, and I'm staying here tonight." Another pause. Then the second man spoke, his voice deeper and quieter. "Can you just open the door so we can figure it out?" I nearly did. I almost reached for the knob. But a voice in my head, my mom's maybe, whispered, "Don't be stupid." Instead, I called out, louder this time. "My husband's in the back room. He'll be out in a minute to deal with this." I knew what I sounded like. Some scared girl trying to bluff. But it was the only card I had. There was silence. No footsteps, no voices. I waited, holding my breath. Then, slowly, I crept to the side of the window where I could lift the curtain a fraction without being seen. One man stood on the porch. Average height, dark hair, wearing a jacket with a hood up. The other one was pacing near the edge of the driveway, looking down the road like he was waiting for something. Neither of them moved toward a car. Neither of them held a phone. They just stood there. I backed away and locked myself in the bedroom, phone in hand, heart slamming so hard I thought I might throw up. I dialed 911. The dispatcher picked up after what felt like an eternity, though later I saw it had only taken 2 rings. 911, what's your emergency? I whispered into the phone, afraid to speak too loud. I'm staying at an Airbnb outside Harper's Glen. There are 2 men outside saying they have this place booked, but it doesn't feel right. They won't leave. The dispatcher's voice stayed calm, professional. "Okay, ma'am. What's the address?" I rattled it off, watching the doorknob like it might start turning any second. "Are your doors locked?" "Yes, but the front one only has a regular lock." "Okay, stay on the line with me. Deputies are on their way, but it'll be about 15 minutes. That's a remote area." 15 minutes. It might as well have been an hour. I crept back to the window and risked another glance. The guy on the porch was gone. My stomach dropped. I whispered into the phone, "I don't see them. Stay inside. Do not open the door for anyone except law enforcement. Do you have a back exit?" There was. A sliding glass door off the kitchen that led to the backyard. I tiptoed toward it, every floorboard creak making me flinch. It was dark out now, and the yard backed up to dense trees. I was debating whether it was safer to stay put or make a run for my car when I heard it. A faint tap, tap, tap on the back glass. I froze. The dispatcher must have heard my breathing change. "Ma'am? Are you okay?" "They're at the back," I whispered. "I need you to get somewhere you can lock yourself in. A bathroom, a bedroom, somewhere safe." I slipped into the small bathroom near the kitchen and locked the door. There was no window, just a vent fan humming faintly. That's when I heard it. A knock at the front door again, followed by a voice. "Hey, sorry about earlier. We figured it out. Wrong house, our bad." Same overly casual tone as before. Too upbeat. Too forced. I stayed silent. Another knock. Then nothing. I sat on the floor of that bathroom for what felt like forever. The dispatcher staying on the line, calmly reminding me help was on the way. When the deputies finally arrived, 22 minutes later, according to my call log, they didn't find anyone outside. No footprints, no tire tracks, nothing but the light dusting of pine needles over the gravel. The officers were kind, professional, but it was clear they thought it was probably a misunderstanding. Could have been some locals messing around, or folks genuinely lost. "You know how it is in these small towns," one of them said. I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell them no one lost behaves like that. No one accidentally shows up at a random Airbnb, refuses to leave, then circles around back. But what was I going to say? That I had a bad feeling? That their tone felt wrong? That they didn't have a car? I left that house an hour later, drove all the way to the coast, straight through the night, running on pure adrenaline. I messaged the Airbnb host and told her what happened. She apologized profusely, said she'd never had anything like that happen before, promised to report it to the platform. I don't know what they wanted. I don't know if it was a robbery or something worse. I'll never stay somewhere that isolated alone again, and I'll never forget the way those two men just stood there, like they had all the time in the world, and like they knew no one would hear me scream. I've always been the kind of person who feels more at ease around strangers than I do with my own family. Growing up in a small, suffocating town called Ridgemont in northern Idaho, my childhood was the kind of bland, hollow experience you might see in those old American movies, the ones where the streets are empty after 9, neighbors watch you through their blinds, and the highlight of your week is grabbing a milkshake at the lone diner by the highway. My dad left when I was 8. My mom, God bless her, worked 2 jobs at a pharmacy and a diner just to keep the lights on. I didn't have siblings, and making friends didn't come naturally. It wasn't that I was antisocial, I just never felt like I fit. The conversations felt rehearsed, the smiles forced. By the time I hit 23, I'd decided small towns weren't for me. I moved to Spokane, Washington, started working at a logistics company handling inbound shipments for furniture stores, and built a little life I could tolerate. I didn't date much. Most of my romantic experiences were through dating apps. There was a strange comfort in it. The anonymity, the gradual unfolding of personalities through text. You could think about your replies, be witty on your own time. It wasn't until I met a girl named Marissa Hale on Tinder that I realized how badly I craved actual human connection. Marissa wasn't just pretty. She was captivating. Shoulder-length dark brown hair, sharp hazel eyes, and this crooked smile that somehow made her look both mischievous and shy at the same time. We hit it off immediately, exchanging stories about bad dates, weird family traditions, and movies we claimed to love but hadn't actually seen. Only one issue. She lived in a small city called Cedar Bluff, a 4.5-hour drive from me. I hadn't even realized it at first. Somehow my app had my location services switched off and placed me somewhere near her by default. When we figured it out, I thought that might be the end of it. But it wasn't. We kept talking. Texting turned into phone calls into video chats. After 6 weeks of nightly conversations and inside jokes, we finally talked about meeting up. "I'd invite you to stay at my place," she said one evening, twisting a lock of hair around her finger on camera. "But I barely know you, Liam. You could be a serial killer for all I know." "I mean, statistically unlikely," I joked. "But I get it. Stranger danger." We both laughed. And so the plan was made. I'd book an Airbnb, spend a weekend in Cedar Bluff, and we'd meet up for coffee and see where things went. I'm a broke 20-something, so when I opened the app to look for places, I wasn't hunting for charm or luxury. Just somewhere cheap, decently clean, and not too far from the cafe we'd agreed on. Most places were either out of my price range or fully booked. Apparently, there was some antique car show happening in town that weekend. Lucky me. The only affordable listing available was a house on the outskirts of Cedar Bluff, divided into private rooms. The pictures made it look serviceable. Queen bed, a little writing desk, shared bathroom, and a note about plenty of parking space on the gravel driveway. I didn't love the idea of shared spaces, but it was one night. What's the worst that could happen? I booked it. When I pulled up to the house on a cloudy Friday afternoon, it looked older than the photos had suggested. A 2-story 1960s suburban build, beige paint peeling slightly at the corners, with a dented mailbox leaning to one side. There were 2 cars in the driveway already, a battered Ford Escape and a bright red Jetta. A small wooden sign by the front door read, "Welcome guests, check in at 3 p.m. It was 3:17. The host was a woman named Diane. Mid-50s, wiry frame, short graying hair, wearing a faded Seahawks sweatshirt when she answered the door. "Liam, right?" she said, her voice rough, like someone who smoked most of her life. "Yeah, that's me." "Room's downstairs. You're the only one down there tonight. Everyone else is upstairs. Bathrooms shared, kitchen's open, just clean up after yourself. You can park out back if you want." I thanked her and lugged my overnight bag inside. The house smelled like old carpet and a faint hint of pine sol. Family photos lined the hallway. A younger Diane in happier years, kids I assumed were hers. The basement was accessible via a narrow wooden staircase, the kind that creaks under every step. The air got colder the further down I went. Exposed pipes ran along the low ceiling. The floors were painted concrete, scuffed and chipped in places. My room was at the end of the hallway. No lock on the door. Just a basic latch you could hook from the inside. I remember feeling a twinge of unease then, the kind you ignore because you've already committed to the decision. Marissa texted me while I was unpacking. Marissa, "Still good for 6? Me, "Absolutely. Nervous but excited." Marissa, "Me too. I'll be at Perk and Pour early. First round's on me." I smiled at that. The cafe was 10 minutes away, tucked between a vintage bookstore and an old-school record shop. When I saw her sitting by the window, wearing a dark denim jacket and nursing a mug of something steamy, my stomach flipped. She was even more beautiful in person. "Liam," she said, standing up with that crooked smile, "in the flesh." We hugged, a little awkward, a little too long. Then we ordered drinks and spent hours walking through the town square, peeking into thrift shops, swapping childhood stories. By the time I dropped her back at her place, a small duplex with a blue door and string lights on the porch, we'd already made plans for brunch the next morning. That night, back at the Airbnb, I was lying in bed scrolling through photos I'd taken that day when I heard footsteps. The basement had 2 rooms, mine and another at the far end. I hadn't seen the other guest yet, but I'd heard someone arrive earlier while I was out. At 3:17 a.m., I remember because I checked my phone, a soft creak sounded from the hallway. I thought maybe it was Diane heading to the basement laundry, but then a faint click. I sat up, the room pitch dark, heart thudding. I grabbed my phone, flicked on the flashlight. Standing in my doorway, barely visible in the beam of light, was a man, mid-30s maybe. Pale, messy brown hair, holding up his phone, pointed directly at me. For a full, frozen second, neither of us spoke. "What the hell are you doing?" I croaked. He smiled. Not a sheepish, caught red-handed smile. A cold, deliberate grin. "Just making memories," he whispered. I scrambled for my shoes. "Get the fuck out of here or I'm calling the cops." He giggled, a soft, unsettling sound, then backed out of the room and disappeared down the hallway. I hooked the latch, sat there in the dim glow of my phone, pulse hammering, too afraid to move. At dawn, I grabbed my bag and bolted. Diane was nowhere to be found. The house felt like a tomb. I checked into a cheap motel on the edge of town, then texted Marissa explaining what happened. She was horrified, offered to let me crash on her couch, but I didn't want to risk making things weird. We still met for brunch. Still laughed. She made me promise never to stay in a stranger's basement again. I never saw that man again. Never got an explanation. Airbnb support refunded me after a long email thread, but no one ever contacted me about it. It's been 3 years. Marissa and I are still together. Sometimes when we tell people how we met, we leave out the basement part. Other times, late at night, a few drinks in, I'll tell the whole story. About the man in the doorway, the phone, the whisper, nobody ever believes it. But I know what I saw. And I still check the corners of every room before I sleep. I've always been a bit of a loner. It's not that I don't like people, I just find it easier to think, to breathe when I'm on my own. I grew up in a small, forgettable town called Eddington, about 2 hours outside of Denver. Everyone knew everyone's business, and privacy was a luxury you never really had. By the time I turned 26, I promised myself that one day I'd take a trip somewhere, anywhere, alone. No one asking where I was going, no one calling to check in, no one to answer to. That chance finally came last October. I'd been grinding at a dead-end office job, sitting in a cubicle under flickering fluorescent lights for almost 5 years. Between unpaid overtime and pointless meetings about team synergy, my life felt like a slow drip. One evening, while scrolling through my phone on my couch, half watching some Netflix documentary I wouldn't remember the next day, I saw a last-minute booking deal for an Airbnb in a little mountain town called Woodhaven, Colorado. A small town I'd never heard of, tucked away somewhere northwest of Boulder. The listing was simple. Charming one-bedroom cabin on Hollow Pine Road. Quiet, private, perfect for solo travelers. 15 minutes to town, full kitchen, mountain views. There were a few photos attached. A modest cabin, old wooden floors, a small porch swing, and thick pine trees wrapping around the property. It looked weathered but cozy, and best of all, it was dirt cheap. I figured maybe it was off-season or the place wasn't getting much business. I didn't care. I booked it. I left Eddington around 6 a.m. on a chilly Saturday. My little 2007 Corolla barely made it through those winding roads, but I felt more alive during that drive than I had in months. Windows cracked, my favorite playlists playing low, that kind of fall air you can only get in the mountains, crisp, biting, carrying the scent of wet pine and dry leaves. I pulled into Woodhaven around noon. Quaint little place. One main street, a diner called the Rusty Fork, a tiny grocery store, a gas station, and a post office. The kind of town where people still waved as you drove by, though you knew you'd never be part of their circle. I grabbed a few groceries, coffee, instant ramen, bottled water, a 6-pack of beer. then made my way to Hollow Pine Road. It was quieter than quiet out there. The gravel road crunched beneath my tires as I drove deeper into the forest. No streetlights, just an occasional hand-painted sign with house numbers nailed to trees. Cell service vanished after the first 2 turns. By the time I reached the cabin, I hadn't seen another car or person in about 15 minutes. The cabin was exactly like the photos, maybe a little older, the wood a bit more faded. A single dim porch light flickered weakly in the overcast daylight. I parked, grabbed my bag and groceries, and made my way up the short steps. There was no one there to meet me, just a lockbox on the door with a combination. I'd gotten a text from the host, a man named Gerald Colton, the night before. "Welcome to Woodhaven, Ethan. Combo for the lockbox is 3729. Make yourself at home. No check-in needed. Let me know if you need anything." G. Sounded like a laid-back old guy. I punched in the code, grabbed the key, and stepped inside. The place was fine. Tiny living room with a stone fireplace, a TV from the early 2000s that probably still had a built-in DVD player, a small kitchen with old but clean appliances, and a bedroom that smelled faintly of cedar and mothballs. The bathroom was tight, with yellowed tile and a shower curtain that stuck to your skin if you got too close. But it was quiet, peaceful. No traffic, no neighbors, just the wind brushing the trees. I unpacked, made a cup of coffee, and sat on the porch for a while, watching the pine needles sway. No one bothered me. No one called. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. That first night, I made some ramen, drank a couple beers, and watched a terrible horror movie on a DVD I found in a cabinet. It was one of those straight-to-video, low-budget ghost flicks that made you laugh more than jump. At around 10:30, the wind picked up, rattling the old windows. I figured I'd head to bed early. I remember locking the front door, twice in fact, the deadbolt and the old latch above it. Then I double-checked the back door too. Old habits from growing up in Eddington. I crawled into bed, letting the cold mountain air settle in. There was no heater, just a small space heater in the corner and a pile of thick wool blankets. Somewhere past midnight I woke up. It wasn't a sound that did it. It was a feeling. That skin-crawling sensation you get when you know someone's watching you. The kind of instinctive fear that tightens your throat before your brain can even explain why. I kept my eyes shut for a minute, telling myself it was a dream, or maybe the beer. But then I heard it. A soft click, like the sound of a door latch coming undone. My eyes snapped open. The room was pitch black save for a faint glow from the space heater. I strained to listen. The wind outside had gone still, and in that dead silence, I could hear the faintest creak of floorboards somewhere outside the bedroom. I sat up slowly, my heart pounding in my ears. The front door had to be locked. I knew I locked it. I slid my phone from the nightstand. No service, not even one bar. For a long minute, I just sat there holding my breath, waiting. Then came the softest scrape, like a hand brushing against wood, right outside the bedroom door. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice cracking. Nothing. I grabbed the only thing within reach, a heavy flashlight from my bag, and crept to the door. The handle looked still. The gap beneath the door showed no shadow, but I could feel someone on the other side. Another long silence. Then, very faintly, a voice. A man's voice, low and raspy, almost a whisper. "Ethan." My stomach dropped. I never told anyone in this town my name. I backed away, clenching the flashlight tighter. "Who the hell are you?" I shouted. No answer. Then, footsteps. Quick, stumbling footsteps moving away from the door toward the front of the house. I heard the front door creak open, then slam shut. The next 30 seconds were the longest of my life. I flung the bedroom door open, flashlight beam cutting through the dark. The living room was empty. The front door stood open, swaying gently in the cold night air. I grabbed my keys, my phone, and ran to my car, locking the doors as soon as I was inside. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I drove into town, parked in the well-lit gas station lot, and waited for dawn. I've always believed that family vacations were supposed to be the best memories of your life. Little breaks from routine that you'd look back on years later with a smile. At least, that's what I told myself the summer before I started 6th grade, when my family decided to rent a beach house for a week in a quiet coastal town called Brighton Cove in North Carolina. It wasn't one of those fancy tourist trap towns you see on postcards. Brighton Cove was quieter, a bit run down in places with weather-beaten houses and a boardwalk that had seen better days. But it was right by the ocean, and my mom was obsessed with the idea of waking up to the sound of waves. At the time, I was 11 years old. My name's Evan. My younger brother Mason was 7, and my older brother Caleb had just turned 18. He was the kind of older brother you don't really hang out with much at that age, always glued to his phone or sneaking cigarettes when my parents weren't around. My mom, Lorna, was a nurse who worked crazy hours, and my dad, Rick, was a contractor who practically lived in his tool belt. We weren't rich by any means, which is probably why my parents found the place they did. It was a big 2-story beach house listed on Airbnb, with pictures of a huge deck, a hot tub, and a promise of cozy, family-friendly oceanfront vibes. It was cheaper than a hotel for 5 people, and it had a kitchen which my mom loved because she hated eating out all week. The listing had a couple of reviews. Nothing bad, just some mentions of creaky floors and slow Wi-Fi. I remember my dad laughing about it, saying, "As long as the plumbing works and the AC blows cold, I don't give a damn about creaky floors." We left early on a Sunday morning, our minivan loaded with beach chairs, coolers, and an absurd amount of snacks. I had my headphones on for most of the drive, the same 3 songs on repeat while I stared out at endless stretches of highway. Mason kept asking if we were there yet every 5 minutes, and Caleb didn't speak a word, glued to whatever was happening on his phone. By the time we pulled into Brighton Cove, it was late afternoon. The sun hung low, making the ocean shimmer like a sheet of glass. The house looked older than in the pictures, pale blue paint peeling in spots, one of the shutters hanging crooked, but my mom insisted it was charming. We carried our bags inside, the screen door creaking loud enough to wake the dead. The inside was exactly what you'd expect: mismatched furniture, faded curtains, and that unmistakable musty smell of old wood and salt air. The layout was simple. When you walked in, there was a small living room straight ahead, with a sliding glass door leading to the deck, a kitchen to the left, a narrow staircase on the right, and upstairs were 4 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. We each picked rooms like it was a race. Mason and I grabbed the room with the bunk beds, a tiny space to the left of the stairs with a window facing the side of the house. Caleb took the bigger room across the hall because it had a queen-sized bed and a TV with some old DVD player. My parents claimed the master bedroom at the end of the hall, complete with its own bathroom and a balcony that looked out over the beach. Once we settled in, Mom unpacked groceries, Dad cracked open a beer, and Mason and I tore off our shoes to go check out the deck. The ocean was close enough that you could hear every wave hit the shore like a distant drum. We sat in the hot tub as the sun started to set, its last orange glow spilling over the water. "This place ain't so bad," Dad said, leaning back with his drink. "Might be the first decent decision your mother's made all year." Mom rolled her eyes but smiled. Caleb was upstairs, probably texting some girl or watching whatever weird stuff he was into. It felt normal, calm, and then we heard it. A soft, distant noise, like a faint scraping sound coming from upstairs. Dad sat up a little. "Y'all hear that?" Mason perked up, looking worried. "What was it?" "Probably just the old house settling," Mom offered, but even she didn't sound convinced. Then it came again. A quiet, deliberate clicking sound. It wasn't loud, but sharp enough to cut through the noise of the ocean and the faint hum of the hot tub. Dad muttered something under his breath and got out, water dripping from his jeans. "I'll check it out." I don't know what made me follow him. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe because despite being kind of a tough guy, Dad had a weird way of making you feel safe just by being in the room. "Stay with your mother," he told me when he saw me trailing behind him. I shook my head. "I want to come." He sighed, grabbed the small pistol he kept in his overnight bag, something he never traveled without, and motioned for me to stay close. We moved up the stairs, the boards groaning under every step. The hallway was dark, only a sliver of light coming from under Caleb's door. I could hear faint music, probably his headphones. The first two bedrooms were empty, closet doors open, nothing under the beds except dust and a couple of old Monopoly pieces. Then came the master bedroom. The door was half open. Inside, everything looked normal. The bed was made, our luggage where we left it, but the closet door was ajar, a narrow crack that definitely hadn't been there earlier when Mom hung up her dress. Dad whispered, "Stay behind me." He pushed the door open with the barrel of the gun. There was a man inside. I'll never forget the look on his face, pale, sweaty, wide-eyed. He wasn't old, maybe mid-30s, wearing dark clothes, his hair slick with sweat. In one hand, he gripped a long, thin kitchen knife. Dad shouted, "Don't move!" But the guy lunged. It happened so fast. The man swung the knife and caught Dad in the arm. Blood splashed onto the wall. Dad stumbled back, cursed, and fired a warning shot into the ceiling. I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the fire poker from next to the little fireplace and swung it as hard as I could at the man's back. It connected with a sickening thud, and he went down hard. Dad pinned him to the ground, gun to his head. "Call the goddamn cops," he barked. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely dial, but the dispatcher answered almost immediately. I told her what happened, gave her the address from the rental paperwork, and within what felt like seconds we heard sirens. The man was arrested on the spot. His name was Darren Cole. Turned out he was the property owner's estranged son. The house was in his mother's name, and he'd been secretly living in a locked storage room in the attic for months, sneaking into the rooms at night after guests fell asleep. We later learned he'd broken the lock that day, hiding in the closet when he realized a new family had arrived. Nobody knew what his plan was. The cops found rope, duct tape, and another knife in a duffel bag under a loose floorboard in the master bedroom. Dad needed 13 stitches in his arm, the scars still there. We left that night and checked into a crappy motel 2 towns over. I haven't stayed in an Airbnb since. Neither has anyone in my family. And if Darren Cole is still alive somewhere, rotting in a cell, I hope to God he never gets out. I've never been one of those people who crave the spotlight. Even when I was a kid, I was always happiest sitting at the edge of the group, laughing at other people's stories rather than telling my own. My name's Nathan, and a few years ago, the summer after college graduation, I planned a trip that still keeps me up at night sometimes. I was 24 back then, fresh out of a communications degree I wasn't sure I even wanted. Life felt heavy in a way it hadn't before. My 3 closest friends, Marcus, Troy, and Dylan, were all in the same boat. We'd spent the last 4 years in a small Ohio college town, bouncing between classes, part-time jobs, and cheap bars. Now we were facing the real world, and none of us wanted to look it in the eye just yet. So when Marcus suggested we take a trip to celebrate graduation, it didn't take much convincing. "Dude, I'm telling you," Marcus had said one evening as we sat on my apartment floor drinking whatever was cheapest at the gas station, "we need to get out of here. Just one last adventure before we all become office drones." Troy chimed in. "Somewhere quiet. No crowds. No bullshit." Dylan raised his beer can. "To bad decisions." We all laughed, and within a week it became my job to actually plan this thing. Partly because I'm a control freak, and partly because, let's be honest, they didn't want to deal with it. I started browsing Airbnb listings. At first, we looked at the usual stuff. Beach houses, lakefront condos, cabins with hot tubs. Most of it felt too polished, too safe. Then one night, after a few too many drinks and a long scroll through obscure listings, I found it. A small, weathered cabin about 20 minutes outside a town called Millersford, Pennsylvania. Population, maybe 1,000. The listing photos weren't exactly professional. Dimly lit shots of wood-paneled walls, a rickety front porch, a view of thick forest pressing in from all sides. The place had 2 bedrooms, a stone fireplace, and a narrow deck that overlooked a creek. I should have known better. The listing only had a handful of reviews, most of them short and vague. Quaint spot, very remote. Felt like stepping back in time. One review simply read, "Different kind of experience. Would recommend if you're looking for something off the grid." I showed it to the guys. "This place looks like a horror movie set," Troy joked. "I love it," Marcus grinned. "Book it." I did. We left on a Friday afternoon in early June. The sky was bruised with low clouds, and the humidity made everything feel sticky and oppressive. The drive from Columbus to Millersford was about 3 hours, most of it along narrow 2-lane roads that cut through stretches of farmland and dense trees. We stopped at a gas station on the edge of town to grab firewood and snacks. The woman behind the counter looked us over like she already knew we didn't belong. "You boys heading out to Kettle Rock?" she asked as she rang up our stuff. Somewhere out that way, yeah," I said. "Careful out there. Not a lot of folks live past the creek anymore." I smiled politely and paid, chalking it up to small-town superstition. We climbed back into Marcus's SUV and headed toward the cabin. The last leg of the trip was rough, a narrow dirt road riddled with potholes, branches scraping against the car windows. Eventually, we reached a small clearing where a faded wooden sign read, "Private property. No vehicle access beyond this point." We grabbed our backpacks and a cooler, locking the SUV before following a faint trail into the woods. It was about a 25-minute hike, the forest thick and quiet around us. The air smelled like wet earth and old leaves. When the cabin came into view, I felt a weird mixture of excitement and unease. It was exactly like the pictures. Small, weathered, a little crooked. A narrow chimney leaned slightly to one side. The windows were dusty and streaked. A stack of firewood sat by the front door, brittle with age. "Man, this place is perfect," Dylan said, dropping his bag onto the porch. We claimed rooms. Troy and I took the one with the bunk beds while Marcus and Dylan flipped a coin for the bigger room. Marcus won. We unpacked, cracked open a few beers, and settled in. The first night was easy. We built a fire in the old stone pit out back, roasted marshmallows, and drank until the stars came out in full. There was no cell service, no Wi-Fi, no noise beyond the crackle of the fire and the occasional hoot of an owl. It was exactly what we'd wanted. "I could live out here, man," Marcus said, staring up at the sky. "Yeah," I agreed, "for a weekend." We laughed. The second night, things changed. It started with a noise. Faint at first, like footsteps crunching on dry leaves outside the cabin. We were playing cards at the kitchen table when Troy froze. "Did you hear that?" Marcus laughed. "Probably a deer, dude." But then it came again. A steady, deliberate pacing circling the cabin. We killed the lantern and sat in the dark listening. The footsteps stopped near the front door. "Maybe we should check it out," Dylan whispered. "Are you insane?" I hissed. "If it's some animal or a person, we don't need to mess with it." We argued in hushed tones until the sound drifted away. Eventually, we convinced ourselves it was nothing and went to bed. I couldn't sleep. Every small noise set my nerves on edge. The creak of old wood, the groan of the wind. Around 2:30 a.m., I heard something fall in the kitchen. Heart pounding, I slid out of the bunk bed and quietly woke Troy. "There's someone in the cabin," I whispered. We crept to the doorway and peeked into the kitchen. A man stood there, tall, thin, dressed in dark clothes. He moved with casual confidence, rummaging through our bags and cabinets like he belonged there. He didn't seem to care about the noise, didn't even glance toward us. I grabbed an old fishing rod leaning against the wall. Troy clutched a fireplace poker, We backed into the bedroom and woke the others. There was a terrifying, silent moment as we all processed what was happening. "We gotta get out," Marcus whispered. "Keys are in the kitchen," I said. Dylan's face went pale. We huddled there, weaponless and unsure. The sounds in the kitchen stopped. Silence settled over the cabin like a heavy blanket. Then, nothing. No footsteps, no door opening, no voice. Marcus finally worked up the nerve to look. The kitchen was empty, but the keys were gone. We spent the rest of the night in the back room, taking turns keeping watch. None of us slept. At dawn, we ventured outside. The forest was still, heavy with mist. We followed the trail to where the SUV had been. Gone. Only tire tracks in the soft dirt. We didn't know what to do. No signal, no way to call for help, and miles of forest in every direction. We decided to follow the road, hoping to find a house or gas station. Hours passed. Our water ran low. The heat pressed down on us. Every time we heard an engine in the distance, our hearts leapt. But it was always nothing. Finally, near dusk, a rusted pickup appeared at the crest of the hill. We ran into the road, waving our arms. The driver, a middle-aged man with a lined face and a hunting cap, stopped and rolled down the window. "You boys lost?" We explained everything. He listened, expression unreadable. "I'll call the sheriff. You get in." We climbed into the truck bed and rode to town. The sheriff's deputies found the SUV later that night, abandoned miles away. The keys in the ignition, nothing missing. They never caught the guy. The locals had their theories. A drifter, a poacher, some unhinged hermit living in the woods. We left town the next morning, vowing never to talk about it again. But sometimes late at night, I still wonder if it was a random break-in or if he was watching us from the trees the whole time, and if he's still out there, waiting. I've always considered myself a fairly private person. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood in Rutland, Vermont, privacy was a rare commodity. I was the youngest of 4 brothers crammed into a small, drafty house with paper-thin walls where every argument, secret, or midnight snack run was public knowledge. My father worked night shifts at a paper mill, and my mother juggled 2 part-time jobs cleaning motels. I think that environment made me crave solitude more than most. So when I finally landed a stable job in my late 30s working remote tech support for a software company, the first thing I did was pack up what little I had and move a couple hours east to a quieter town, Cedar Ridge, New Hampshire. Population, around 4,200. A place where the local diner knew your coffee order after the second visit and the postmaster still handed you your mail with a grin and a "How's your day, fella?" I bought an old colonial-style house just off Mill Street. It was a little more than I should have spent, truth be told. White picket fence, wrap-around porch with chipped paint, 2 stories with 4 bedrooms, and a massive oak tree in the backyard that must have been standing for over a century. It needed work. Floors that creaked like a horror movie set and plumbing older than my mother's Buick. But it was mine. Since the mortgage was a stretch, my sister Leslie, who's always had a knack for finding side hustles, suggested renting a room out on Airbnb. "It's easy money, Cal," she'd said over the phone, her voice thick with excitement. "You don't even have to talk to him if you don't wanna. Just clean the room, give him the code, and let him be." I was skeptical at first. I'd never been big on strangers in my space, but I needed the money, and Cedar Ridge wasn't exactly flooded with renters. So I gave it a shot. For the first year or so, it was fine. Mostly traveling salespeople passing through, a couple of folks doing leaf peeping tours in the fall, a retired school teacher named Marjorie who stayed for 2 nights and left me a plate of homemade molasses cookies as a thank you. Every one of them polite, quiet, and gone before you'd even realize they were there. But then, there was him. His name was Simon Becker. He booked a 3-night stay in early November, a slow time for bookings just after the tourist season ended, but before the snowbirds started heading south. His profile showed a young man, maybe mid-20s, clean-cut with dark hair and glasses. Said he was a freelance writer working on a project about small towns in New England. When he arrived, it was late afternoon, gray and cold with the kind of dull sky that makes you want to crawl under a blanket. I met him on the porch, extending a hand out of habit. "Cal Thompson?" I said. "Simon," he replied, gripping my hand with surprising firmness. "Thanks for having me." "Place is yours," I told him. "Bedroom's upstairs, first door on the left. You'll have the bathroom next to it. Wi-Fi passwords on the fridge." He nodded, lifting a single canvas duffel onto his shoulder. "Appreciate it. I'll try to keep out of your way." Most guests I barely saw. Simon was no different. He spent his time holed up in his room or gone during the day. I'd catch glimpses of him now and then, passing in the hallway, grabbing a bottle of water from the kitchen. We exchanged polite small talk. "You find any good spots to write?" I asked on his second night. "Yeah," he said, eyes darting away. "The park by the lake's nice." And that was about it, until the third night. It was close to midnight, and I was in bed, half watching an old Columbo rerun on my laptop when I heard something. A faint scraping sound. At first I thought it was just the wind rattling the loose gutter by the back porch. Happens every now and then in the fall. But then it came again. A soft, deliberate drag of something against wood. I got up, slipped on my slippers, and padded down the hall. The light under Simon's door was on. I knocked gently. "Everything okay in there?" Silence. I waited a beat. Another soft scrape. Something felt off. My stomach tightened. I knocked harder. "Simon?" Still nothing. After another second, I tried the knob. Locked. Now, I'll admit, I probably should have just left it. Maybe he was asleep with headphones in. Maybe it was none of my business, but there was something wrong about the quiet on the other side of that door. Something in the air that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I went back downstairs, grabbed the spare key from the hook by the pantry, and returned. "Simon, I'm coming in," I called. I unlocked the door and pushed it open. The room was empty. His duffel was gone. The window was open, cold air leaking in, curtain fluttering like a pale hand. And in the corner near the ceiling, something caught my eye. A small black device, no bigger than a quarter, lodged discreetly in the molding. A goddamn camera. I felt my chest go tight. I climbed onto the desk chair, plucked the thing out of the corner, and held it in my palm. It was one of those tiny pinhole models you can get online for $30, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. What the hell was he recording? And how many of these were there? I tore the room apart. Nothing in the dresser drawers, nothing in the closet, nothing under the bed. I went through the rest of the house in a frenzy. Every room. Behind picture frames, inside vent covers, above doorways. I found 3 more. One tucked into the plant on the mantel, another wedged behind a heating vent in the downstairs bathroom, a third hidden inside a hollowed-out book on my living room shelf. My stomach lurched. I called the local sheriff's department. Deputy Greg Fallon showed up about 20 minutes later, a burly guy with a thick beard and the slow, careful way of speaking common to old New England towns. He took one look at the devices and let out a low whistle. "Jesus, Cal. You didn't notice these before?" I shook my head. "I swear to God, Greg, I had no idea. He must have planted them while he was here." "Any sign of where he went?" "Window was open. Bag's gone." He sighed, scribbling something in his notepad. "All right, I'll put out a notice. Chances are he's halfway to Boston by now." We didn't catch him. I changed the locks, bought a dozen new smoke detectors with built-in cameras of my own just in case. For weeks I felt like I was being watched. I couldn't sleep without every light on in the house. I never rented out another room again. But it wasn't over. Not really. About a year later, a package arrived. No return address. Inside was a small flash drive and a note. "For your collection." I didn't want to look. God help me, I didn't. But curiosity's a stubborn thing. I plugged it into my old laptop. The files were dated. Video clips. Dozens of them. Footage from inside my home. Me watching TV, cooking, sleeping. A couple from long before Simon ever stayed there. I have no idea how long I'd been watched. Or by who. I reported it to the police. Deputy Fallon came out again, grim-faced. But there was nothing to trace. Nothing to link it to Simon Becker, or whoever he really was. I live alone still. Same house. But I ripped out every vent, every baseboard, every panel of molding, put in new drywall, security system with cameras of my own now. I don't sleep much, but at least when I do, it's with the knowledge that if someone's watching me now, I'll damn well see them coming. And if you ever think about renting a room to a stranger for a little extra cash, don't. I've always been one of those people who prefer traveling alone. It's not that I don't enjoy good company. I just find something therapeutic in navigating a new place at my own pace, on my own terms. No compromising on where to eat, which sights to see, how long to spend in one place. It's the kind of freedom you don't realize you're missing until you finally experience it. Back in October of 2019, about 6 months before the world went to hell, I decided to take a 2-week solo trip to Europe. I was 28 at the time, working as a freelance web developer, and with no kids, no mortgage, and no real responsibilities outside of a few client deadlines. I figured it was as good a time as any to scratch that travel itch. I planned to hit a few smaller cities and towns outside of the usual Paris, London, Rome circuit. Places people didn't talk about as much, where you could still find the kind of streets that didn't reek of souvenir shops and chain restaurants. The first stop on my list was a little town in southern France called Valmont-sur-Aube, a quiet riverside commune I'd read about in some obscure travel blog. Supposedly picturesque, serene, and most importantly, cheap. I booked my stay through Airbnb. The listing was modest, an older couple offering a private guest room in their countryside home. The pictures showed a stone house with ivy crawling up the side, a garden out back, and a cozy little bedroom with white linens and rustic wooden shutters. It wasn't 5-star, but it had charm. The hosts, Emile and Odette Marchand, had only 2 reviews, but both were glowing. One mentioned how they'd cooked a homemade dinner for their guest. That sealed it for me. After a long flight and an unfamiliar drive on winding roads, I figured a warm meal and a soft bed sounded like a decent way to start my trip. When I arrived, it was just past 7 p.m. The sun was starting to dip behind the trees, throwing long shadows across the narrow lanes. Their home was a little set back from the main road, up a gravel drive lined with cypress trees. The place looked like something off a postcard, with cracked shutters and a wrought iron fence. Emile, a wiry man with thinning gray hair, met me at the front door. He wore a faded blue cardigan and a warm, practiced smile. Odette was a round, soft-featured woman who smelled faintly of lavender and wore her silver hair in a neat bun. Both spoke decent English, with thick accents that somehow made everything sound gentler. "Welcome, welcome, Mr. Carter, yes? From the States, yes?" Emile greeted me, shaking my hand with both of his. "Yeah, Evan Carter. Thanks for having me." Odette stepped forward, pressing a hand to her chest. "You must be tired. Come, we have dinner. You eat, yes?" I'd planned on dropping my bag and heading into town to grab a drink or two, but it felt rude to turn them down, and honestly, I was starving. I smiled. "That'd be great, thank you." The inside of their home was just as charming as the outside. Walls lined with old photographs in tarnished frames, lace curtains, the smell of baking bread still lingering in the air. They ushered me into a small dining room where a simple meal was laid out: a crusty loaf of bread, some local cheese, roasted chicken with herbs, and a carafe of dark red wine. Conversation over dinner was light. They asked about my travels, where I was headed next, what I did for a living. I learned that Emile had worked as a school teacher for most of his life, and Odette had been a florist before they both retired. Their children had moved away, one to Marseille and one to Geneva. It was all pleasant enough, ordinary even. Exactly the kind of evening I'd hoped for to settle into this trip. Afterward, I thanked them and went to explore the town for a bit. Valmont-sur-Aube was as quiet as promised. A couple of pubs, a little church with a bell tower, narrow streets winding through clusters of old stone houses. I grabbed a beer at a place called Le Chat Noir, traded a few words with the bartender, and called it a night around 10:30. When I got back, the house was dark save for a lamp left on in the hallway. A note on the kitchen table written in neat cursive read, "Help yourself to wine. Bonne nuit." I poured a small glass from the carafe they'd left out and took it up to my room. The night air was cool and the distant sound of crickets was oddly calming. I remember lying in bed that night, thinking how perfectly uneventful it all had been. No stress, no awkward moments, just quiet hospitality. But sometime around 2 a.m., something pulled me out of sleep. At first, it was just a faint sensation, the kind of awareness you get when the atmosphere in a room subtly changes. I couldn't place what it was. There was no noise, no footsteps, just this odd, tingling pressure behind my eyes, as if my subconscious was trying to wake me before my brain had caught up. Then there was a flicker of light even through my closed eyelids. Not the warm, diffused kind from a lamp or hallway bulb. It was sharp, like a flash. My mother used to say I was a light sleeper, cursed awake at the drop of a pin. I guess in that moment, it saved me. I opened my eyes. The room was dim, lit only by the moon filtering through the half-drawn curtains, and standing near the foot of my bed were Emile and Odette. At first, I didn't register it. I was in that hazy, half-awake state where the world feels dreamlike and sluggish. But the longer I stared, the clearer the wrongness of the scene became. They were both wearing masks, not the painted masquerade kind, or medical masks. These were rubber latex masks of human faces. Old faces. Sagging, wrinkled, with exaggerated features. Oversized eyes, downturned mouths, sun-spotted skin. The kind of thing you might see in a cheap Halloween store or a forgotten horror film. Odette stood near the door, a small digital camera in her hand. The glow from its screen lit her face from below. Emile was closer, 1 foot almost at the edge of my bed. I didn't move, didn't speak. For a moment, neither did they. The air in the room was so still it felt thick, oppressive. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Then Emile took a step closer. "You're dreaming, Evan," he murmured, his voice distorted by the rubber mask carrying a chilling casualness to it. That's when I saw the wrench, a rusted, heavy thing clutched loosely in his right hand, half hidden by his sleeve. The rest of the night was a blur of cold panic. I bolted upright, grabbing my phone and backpack. In that split second, I think some survival instinct took over, because instead of screaming or lunging at them, I simply moved, fast. I shoved past Emile, dodged the outstretched camera, and made for the hallway. "Wait, wait!" Odette's voice called after me. I didn't. I tore down the stairs, nearly slipping on the old wood. The front door wasn't locked. By some miracle, or by their design, it opened easily. I sprinted down the gravel drive, not stopping until I hit the main road. In the cold night air, standing beneath a flickering street lamp, I finally let myself shake. I stood there for what felt like forever, trying to catch my breath, my hands trembling so hard I could barely keep hold of my phone. The night was silent except for the chirp of crickets and the distant trickle of the river. No footsteps, no voices, nothing. I half expected them to come running after me. Emile with that wrench, Odette with her camera, but no one did. The house remained dark, its silhouette barely visible through the trees. I could still see that faint glow from the lamp in the upstairs hallway. I opened Google Maps on my phone with numb fingers, the screen bright in the dark, and saw that the nearest hotel was over 6 kilometers away. There were no Ubers, no cabs, not out here. I didn't even think about going back for my rental car. The keys were still upstairs on the nightstand. I started walking. The road was narrow, flanked by tall hedges and cypress trees, and each shadow felt like it was waiting to move. I kept checking behind me, convinced I'd see headlights or the dim glow of a flashlight weaving through the trees. But there was nothing. After about 20 minutes, I came across a small bus stop, a wooden shelter with a cracked plexiglass panel. I ducked inside, more for the illusion of safety than any real protection, and called the emergency number for the local gendarmerie. My French was shaky, but the dispatcher spoke some English. I told them everything. Well, most of it. I said the hosts had come into my room, that they'd worn masks, that one of them had a wrench. I left out the part about the camera flash and the way Emile had whispered, "You're dreaming, Evan." Saying it out loud made it feel unreal, and I needed them to take me seriously. The dispatcher told me to stay put, that a patrol car would come by. It took nearly 45 minutes, the longest, most bone-cold minutes of my life. When the officers arrived, 2 of them, I explained again what had happened. They asked if I'd been drinking, if I was sure it wasn't a misunderstanding, a prank maybe. I kept insisting, and to their credit, they agreed to go check the house. One of them drove me back toward the property while the other stayed behind with the car. My stomach churned as the house came back into view, looking exactly as it had when I'd first arrived. Peaceful, picture perfect, still. But when they knocked, no one answered. No lights turned on, no movement inside. After a few minutes, they entered. They didn't find anyone. No Emile, no Odette, no masks, no camera. The dining table had been cleared. My rental car was still there, parked neatly by the side. My bag was in the room, my keys and passport untouched. It was like the house had just exhaled and gone back to sleep. The officers asked if I wanted to come inside and collect my things. I refused. Instead, I told them to grab my bag, and when they brought it out, I checked the front pocket where I'd left my phone charger. It wasn't there. In its place was a single, old-fashioned photograph. Black and white, faded at the edges. It showed a young man sitting at the very same dining table I'd eaten at, a carafe of wine in front of him, smiling nervously at the camera. Behind him, standing in the doorway, barely in focus, were Emile and Odette, or at least people who looked just like them, only this picture looked like it was taken 40 or 50 years ago. I handed it to the officer, my hands ice cold. He frowned at it, exchanged a look with his partner, and quietly told me to get in the car. They drove me into town and dropped me at a small hotel near the square. One of them left his card, told me to come by the station in the morning for a formal statement. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept the lights on, the chair propped against the door. My flight home wasn't for another 12 days, but I booked a one-way ticket out of France the next morning. I never heard from the police again. Never got a follow-up call, an email, nothing. When I checked the Airbnb listing a week later, it was gone. Not just unavailable, completely wiped, like it had never existed. I tried searching for Valmont-sur-Aub's public records, wondering if Emile and Odette Marchand had ever lived there. Nothing. And here's the thing I still can't explain. Every once in a while, late at night, when my phone screen goes dark and my reflection stares back at me, I swear just for a second I can see the faint glow of a flash behind me, like someone's still watching, somewhere,